All right, everybody, thank you so much for being here, and welcome to my people. I am your host, Erica, and I'm so excited that we are coming to you live from Truth to Power at the Democratic National Convention here in Philadelphia. Today we're going to be talking about democracy and power and citizenship, big topics, and we've got some very big people here to talk about that with us today. Let me introduce them to you really quickly. We've got, all the way on the end, we've got National Latino Outreach Strategist for Bernie Sanders and DNC Platform Committee member, Cesar Vargas. Next to him, we have activist, hip-hop journalist, and the former Green Party vice presidential candidate, Rosa Celemnte. We've got executive director of one of the baddest civil rights organizations around. My mama would say that, one of the baddest organizations, colorofchange.org, Rashad Robinson. Right next to me, we have the beautiful Native American rights activist and vocalist, Calina Lawrence. And right here, my buddy, Pulitzer Prize award-winning journalist and the founder of Define American and Emerging U.S., Jose Antonio Vargas. So, I don't know if you all have seen my peoples before or been to one of our events, but we like to be excited, we like to be rowdy, we like to be real. That's what the concept is. It's my peoples having very real conversations. But before we kick it off, we could not be here and do this without paying homage to Philadelphia, to the city that we are in, to the amazing legacy of arts and culture that is here. So kicking it off for us, I want to introduce to you Philly's third poet laureate, Yolanda Wisher.
Welcome to Philly. This is called Dear John, Letter to America. America, you beautiful suitor of indigenous bitches. I am a slave ship and you are a skyscraper. I keep the bottom line, you got the upper hand. We try to make love, but there's a war of flesh and steel going on. You used to woo me with roses carved from melons, douches of Colt 45 and holy water, ivory pearls that turned out to be my grandpa's wisdom teeth. I must have been crazy to keep setting your place at the welcome table, thinking this or that would be the night that you eat from my fork of blues. Said you loved me, but you just loved my doggy style. You ejaculated rotted dreams, rusted passion across my chest. In the morning, you left my thighs like crack-brained riverbeds, left the scent of your hunger in my hair. Ashamed to say I fell in love with you, America, with your swagger and your big talk. Nobody told me your heart was the world's first digital camera, beating humanity into bloody squares. Nobody told me how you cut mugs from the get-go, the army of hookers you ran with before you lay in my bed, the arsenal of whips and ropes in your closet for the cowboy flicks you produced, directed, and starred in every century. You keep telling me how you're different now, you saved, but you keep making purple moons rise under my eyes. Say you're sorry, but you still find a way to 302 me into oblivion. Build me a dollhouse of steel cages so all my flowers can grow separate and evil. Laugh like a tree grinder when you read my suicide letters. From my soul, you make a sharecropper. A little black box. America, I am the slave ship. You are the skyscraper. I keep the bottom line, baby. You got the upper hand. We making love and there's a war of flesh and steel going on. You, the most sublime, transcendental fornicator. You keep getting caught with your dick caught out, drilling a hole in the world. Sometimes I want to fuck you like there is a tomorrow and a tomorrow and a tomorrow. Sometimes I want to take your hand, take you to the little markets where the people sell their spirits in small pieces, to the alleyways the hustlers have made soft with hip talk. Walk hand in hand along a beach unbought and unbridled, and ride you till you say my name and you change. You'd brand me with invisible kisses. I'd be just like those talk show mamas, forgiving. We'd meet every day at the intersection of the bridge, the phone booth, the hot dog stand, and you tell me your baby dreams, the ones dense and wet as first forest. Show me your dirty draws and your secret birthmark. Maybe then, America, I might give myself to you.
Thank you so much, Yolanda. That was powerful. And it was a line that I love. She said, I want to ride you till you say my name, change, change, change. And I think it's so interesting that that was the theme of what brought us together 8 years ago, right? This idea of hope and change, and that yes, we can. And now here we are, and 8 years later, we've seen what has changed, we've seen what has not changed, we've seen what's gotten marginally better, we've seen what has gotten significantly worse, and we're having this conversation now about what does it mean to be American? What does it mean to truly be a democracy, or if we're being factually correct, it's a republic, but what does it mean? And I want to start with you, Cesar, because first of all, you're the first undocumented person to serve on the Democratic National Committee platform, which is a big deal, a very big deal, very big deal, very big deal. And we've heard so much about this platform being the most progressive that we've ever seen, right? And your presence on the platform is historic, or your presence serving on the platform has been historic, and yet we know the realities of this country. And so I want to know from you and your perspective, having been inside all of what's happening around us right now, is our democracy working the way you would imagine it should work?
Well, first of all, thank you, Eric. Thank you, everyone, so much for having me. And one of the things that really made me realize being in the platform committee, where you are really defining the overall policy priorities for a national political party, and it made a huge difference having someone directly affected at those conversations. It didn't just become a policy debate, an abstract theoretical debate. It became personal. For me, speaking with many of the member committees, I told them that for me, it wasn't about Bernie Sanders. It wasn't about Secretary Clinton. It was about my mom, my 74-year-old mother. It wasn't about a political career. It was about our families. It was about ensuring that people don't have to worry about getting a knock on their door at 6 o'clock in the morning with 30 ICE agents only to arrest a parent. So our democracy, as we saw the platform committee, is a first step. I definitely don't think it's the most progressive, because the reality is that there was a lot of pushback from many of the Hillary Clinton supporters who didn't want to go far enough. But that's okay. We have different points of view, and we're debating ideas. But at the same time, we need to remind this nation that regardless of whether you have papers or not, we do have a voice. And we have seen amazing leaders, whether, we don't have to be millionaires, we don't have to be billionaires, we don't have to be at times white Anglo-Saxon, right? We have seen amazing, like my brother Jose, who literally came out in the New York Times shining a huge light on an issue that was so broken. And ultimately what I reminded them, the Democratic Party and the Republican Party, is that my loyalty will never reside with a political party. My loyalty is not to the Democratic Party, to the Republican Party, to Bernie Sanders, to Hillary Clinton. My loyalty will always remain with my family, with my community, because I'm here to make change for us, not for a political party. And we need to remind the nation that that is our priority.
Jose, Cesar just referenced you, and he referenced your story, right?
Our last names are Vargas. So he's the Latino one, I'm the Asian one.
I love it. I love it. In case anyone was confused. But so he just referenced you, and he talked a little bit about your story, about coming out as undocumented, and all the work that you've done since then. How do you relate what's happening in our democracy right now to your personal story of coming out as undocumented and really traveling the country to define what it means to be American?
Well, the first thing I want to say about this is, can you imagine, like Cesar Vargas, who's the first undocumented person to be passed the law, the New York bar. He's a lawyer. He's a lawyer who doesn't have papers. Isn't that like kind of interesting? So, but when Cesar and I met, to think where we were 5 years ago and to think you're serving on the fucking platform committee, I mean, that's amazing, man. Like that's progress, right? But I have to say, and Eric and I have talked about this offline, we can't talk about immigration and not connect it to everything that is happening in this country. I was just mentioning before we got on, before we went live, I'm really happy to be back in Philly. I was an intern, a summer intern for the Philadelphia Daily News in 2001. I covered, I think, about 24 homicides in, I think, 12 weeks here. And for a kid who was coming from San Francisco Bay Area, my first East Coast experience, I didn't know anything about like black and white dynamic because I grew up in the Bay Area. It was mostly Latino and Asian and white people, and coming here was like such a cultural shock for me, a political shock, and so much so that I literally changed my major from journalism to black studies after I got back to San Francisco
I did too, actually.
State.
I went from journalism to black, but I'm black, so I guess
Well,
it's
I'm not.
different. I guess it's different.
But my point is, how do we not talk about these issues in isolation, right? How do we make sure that in this new emerging America that we're building together, where progress shouldn't come with a party? I was in Cleveland last week for the Republican National Convention. I have to tell you, so I have this hat called, Immigrants Make America Great. I couldn't wear it there. I was actually scared to wear it. I'm not usually a scared person, and it scared me that I was scared. It's scary to me to be at the Cleveland Arena where everybody was white, and the only people of color were the ones working the arena, right? And the 3 or 4 black people that Fox News puts on television. And it was like, you're looking at it and you're like, what are we looking at here? And that's why the work that Rashad is doing, the fact that we can't talk about immigrant rights and not talk about Native Americans, the fact that we have to be able to think about this way beyond Republican and Democrat and think about what the other opportunities are for us.
Right.
So that's where I think we are as a country and what we need to be looking at.
Right, I love that. And you talked a lot about the intersectionality between communities, between issues that we're working on, and you referenced the RNC, so I want to toss that right to Rashad, because Rashad, you've been doing as a part, with Color of Change, but also as a part of this broader movement for Black lives that is happening right now. You've been doing tremendous work, and in particular, had some success with the RNC. Talk a little bit about what you did.
Yeah, so back in February, when Trump started to rise, we were looking at all the corporations that were going to be sponsoring the Republican convention. We're a bit outraged, and we're a bit outraged that these corporations were trying to have it both ways. They're trying to have a relationship with black folks at night and trying to have a relationship with the Republican Party by day, or the other way around, depending on how you look at it. And we started reaching out behind the scenes while also mobilizing our members and going corporation to corporation, phone calls after phone calls, pushing back against their arguments around like they give to both sides, or this is about civic engagement, and directly tying all of what Trump was saying to the corporations. And we started corporation after corporation after corporation to drop. We got over a dozen major Fortune 500 companies to back away from the convention. We left them millions of dollars in the hole, so much so that they had to start sending around letters to their big donors begging for money the couple of days before the convention. I was in Cleveland as well. I was a little nervous too, but I went down on the floor to make sure that there were not to see, the fact of our success of our campaigns, how there weren't as many sandwiches being passed around, how the technology didn't work, and a whole lot of other things that were indicative of the power of not just our organization, A Color of Change, but the larger coalition of Muslim, Latino, women, progressive groups that joined the campaign and really worked with us. The one thing I want to say, though, just around the platform, around the speakers, around all this stuff, is that we have a central theme at Color of Change, is that we can't mistake presence for power. And I want to really put that out there because our presence as people, our presence as our voices will be symbolism, and it will be used to work against our ability to actually change written or unwritten rules. It's great. I voted for President Obama twice. I have been to the White House to meet with him. I have my Yes We Can t-shirts and posters, but that is presence. It doesn't change the rules for black people by having a black person in the White House. And our ability to build the type of powerful movements that lead, that push, and that challenge, and that don't allow us to mistake the people that we put in office for our movement leaders is going to determine whether or not and how successful we are. And so I just want to say that there's going to be a lot of gamemanship around who's on stage, who's not, who speaks, who doesn't. But the question always is about power is, are people nervous about disappointing you? And if people in power are not nervous about disappointing you, if they're not fearful about the implications, then you have nothing.
I like that. I like that. And I like that you broadened the conversation to be, we've talked about democracy and being American, but really it's a conversation about power and how you're exercising your power. And so that particular example, we were talking about wielding economic power, right? We talked about voting. I want to, before we go to our next break, I want to bring Calina and Rosa into this conversation. I'm going to start with Rosa though, because so you ran on the Green Party ticket in 2008. I want to know how what you learned back then in that experience as a woman of color, kind of traveling the country, is shaping how you're looking at what's happening right now.
Well, I voted for the black woman, so I'm happy in 2008 that I was able to not only run, but to vote and be part of the first woman of color ticket to this day in American presidential politics with the Green Party. So, and in 2012, I voted for Jill Stein, and in 2 hours, I'll be with her and marching with the people here in Philadelphia. So, and I think what Rashad said is exactly what we need to talk about, right? Because the reality is that most poor black and brown people are not voting. And it's not because they don't know what's up. They completely know what's up. And they think they don't want to participate at many levels. And I know this from experiences of my family right now in the South Bronx. My own husband who's like, I voted once, I'm good, I'm done, I don't want anything to do with this system, And even I think about really this in historical terms, right? So first and foremost, we're in what I do call the Black Lives Matter historical era, the Ferguson Baltimore Rebellion era. And something I recently spoke to Tef Poe, who was on the front lines those first days of Ferguson, is an amazing MC. And he's like, Rosa, what y'all don't understand is that we're already living in Trump's America. So y'all are behind. And I was like, word, like I even have to take that seriously as an organizer, a movement person, as someone who's trying to bring people to the Green Party, but also encountering the same obstacles that maybe people have, right? And I think what that means, in order to get some type of power, we have to break the duopoly of the Democratic and Republican Party. The Democratic Party is where progressive ideas go to die. Like, do we not see what's happening, like, right at this moment? Right. What the presidential nominee has done to take power away from potentially who should have been the nominee, Bernie Sanders. Even if I don't roll with him, I know what should have happened. I think we have to take that very seriously. And I also think that we can't be shaming people for having a vision of what they want and not voting out of fear. And I feel that I get that from, not just because I'm in the Green Party, but particularly for people who don't want to vote. They're often shamed, right? Like, voting is the most important thing you can do. No, actually, the most important thing you can do is after you cast your vote, how are you going to hold, as a movement, the person you put in power accountable? How are we getting rid of Citizens United? You cannot tell young people to run when an average campaign costs $3.5 million. A Senate race can cost $10 to $15 million. And they get mad at young people who may be seeing something that we're not grappling with.
That's a perfect segue to Calina, because Calina, so I've been dying to talk to you because you've got the context of working particularly with Native American communities, but also you're millennial, right? And so this intersection of how do you even hear this conversation about democracy and about making America great again as a Native American person and understanding the history of this country, the foundation where we come from, and yet as a young person, right, having that sense of optimism and hope?
Well, I would just say that for me, and this is something that I have to conceptualize every single day, but there's a lot of different theory around it, and I think that just to be here right now alive is political. I am not supposed to be here. We were not supposed to survive the genocide in order to develop this country to be what it is. And that's a reality that I've lived with since I was a young kid. And on this Up to Us caravan across the country, I have reminded people that in our communities, on our reservations, and even urban Native people feel every single negative effect of every decision that this government makes. And that's because this government has not been established for us to be preserved, for us to come out of. The government has been established to assimilate us. And if you think about it, I'm speaking English. And so to an extent, the assimilation has succeeded, right? But also, we have done everything in our power to preserve our teachings because we're carriers of the teachings. They don't necessarily belong to us, but we have preserved them. We have preserved how to take care of this earth, because without earth, there is no humanity. Kind of simple, but pretty profound also.
Yeah.
And so for me, growing up in the foster care system, growing up, where I feel like government had their hand on every part, every decision, everything that I have been affected by, there's some form of the United States government's hand in it when we're supposed to be sovereign nations. And people, I really please encourage you that wherever you're from, to look up the treaty tribes of the people that live near your cities, near your towns. And our treaties were written by our leaders as a form of saying, look, you guys are here, colonialism is here, there's not really too much that we can do about it, but we have these demands, we have these contracts that you have to abide by, and that is that we have our teachings to preserve our natural resources. We can be sustainable with our natural resources. So colonize wherever you would like, but give us our space. So we had those things intact, right? But then after the agreements were written, after the vulnerability was in place, pollution started to affect our natural resources. The government was going out and killing our bison because they knew that that's how we lived. We don't have salmon running in our streams anymore, so we can't live by our natural treaties the way that we would like to because we're vulnerable, because that was a target, because there's a recognition of the correlation between our ability to survive with our natural resources. And so then going in and taking our children from our reservations and putting them in boarding schools. Our language was forbidden. Our culture was against the law. And I have a question, and it's an honest question, and it's not to shame anybody, but even of us on this panel, do you guys know when Native Americans were given citizenship in this country?
Not until 1917, 1920.
24.
Yes.
1924.
The Naturalization Act of 1924. Yes.
It's not even 100
Isn't that astounding?
years.
It's not 100 years.
And I'm not even saying that we wanted citizenship, because that's honest. I'm just being honest.
You know what?
Keep
That's
it
the
real.
same. That's the same
Keep it
thing
real.
that.
Then we're going to go to our break in a second. I'll let you wrap that point up, and then.
Yeah, and so I'm just saying too is that we've come to this
That is real.
place where, and there's a lot of discussion around this, whether we live two lives, like we walk in two worlds, because the American Indian Religious Freedom Act was not passed until 1978. 1978, before that you could be imprisoned for just practicing our ceremonies, just being, learn about the American Indian movement, learn about the people who in our communities who have been at the forefront.
Right.
Since, America, the United States of America is really not that old, it's only a couple hundred, few hundred, that's only a few generations. And so, my grandparents who were raised in boarding schools and literal cultural genocide, even if it's physical genocide because of how many of us were killed, but it's cultural genocide because of the stripping of our identities, right? And so we're feeling those things. We feel those things, and so we have to say, okay, what does my colonized mind do to live in sync with my indigenous, the teachings that were somehow preserved?
It's a double consciousness, right?
So we walk with that every single day, and we find that balance, and some of us are like, nah, keep your colonialism, I don't need to be a part, because I'm a sovereign citizen, I'm a dual citizen. I establish my reservation, I abide by our tribal governance, but also we want to bridge that gap. We recognize the severity of preserving humanity now. It's preserving humanity now, and we have those teachings, and we need to be included in every conversation. You need to reach out and include us. You have to.
Yeah.
You have to.
So we're gonna take a quick break because you just schooled all of us, okay? So we're gonna take a quick break. We want you to, when we come back, we're gonna talk about what that vision is. How do we preserve humanity? What is it that we want our country to look like? And what does it look like to be free? What does it really look like to be free? That's what we're gonna talk about. But we like to always take a little bit of time to again, honor some art. And so we're gonna introduce to you Steve Way. He's a substitute teacher by day, a stand-up comic by night. He was born with muscular dystrophy and is a fierce advocate for disability rights and a motivational speaker. Please welcome Steve Way.
Hello. Everybody hear me? Yeah? We're live streaming right now. Hey, Mom. I love coming to political events, especially in 2016, because nothing says progress like, hey, Steve, you have to do your set in front of the stage. So, yay, progress. I also do a lot of charity work with the Muscular Dystrophy Association because, well, obviously, that's more of a visual joke for the people in the back. And I once did a speaking event at a Cub Scout meeting, and it was Disability Awareness Night, and so the kids were getting their disability awareness badge. And at this meeting was a blind woman, a deaf man, and myself. So we all got split into 3 groups, and I had the youngest group. So I figured, instead of lecturing them, I'll just have them ask me questions. And I'll admit, these kids asked some really good questions. And then this one kid asked the $1 million question, how do you shower? I was honest with them. I said, my parents helped me. This kid went into full-blown white girl mode because he literally could not even. His eyes are biting out of his head. His mouth is hanging on the floor. This kid could not handle the fact that my parents helped me shower. So he said, you mean your parents see you naked? And I was like, all right. I'm going to turn the tables on this kid. He's 10. I don't have much. So I said, well, yeah. I mean, you're young. Haven't your parents seen you naked before? And it got really quiet. And the scoutmaster leaned over to me and whispered, his mother is the blind woman. So, I stopped doing that for a while. This is actually my second choice of conventions. I went to the RNC last week. Because if you think about it, it's really a better fit for me. I'm white. I'm on welfare. People have a hard time understanding me when I talk. But then I remembered the Democrats have always paid for my wheelchair, my health insurance, and they've always been down with my socialist bathroom practices. Which, by the way, I'm going to need help with later. So we're going to play a game called Who's the Real Progressive? I recently found out my purpose in life, and that's to give people the opportunity to use me and feel good about themselves. Come on, guys. Really? Jeez. You really are Democrats. Let me explain. So I went out with my dad once to New York, and we saw like a baseball game or something. So we parked our van in a lot and went to the game, came back, and my dad asked the guy how much. And the lot attendant put his hand on my dad's shoulder and he said, you know, I've been having some bad luck lately. So because of your son, it's on me. I'm like, bro, what the hell? You're using me for your own good fortune? I mean, my dad didn't care because I got up to par for free. But then it hit me, like, are people actually nice to me? Or are they just in it for themselves? Are they just in it for the karma points? But don't worry, because, you know, this is a really close and hotly contested election. So I'm going to extend that same opportunity to the Democrats. Help me take the selfie with Hillary, karma point. Help me write in Bernie Sanders' name when I vote, karma point. To the progressive that pulls my pants down to help me go to the bathroom, that's 2 karma points. I'll give you 3 if you accidentally touch something.
Oh no.
I'll give you 4 if you touch it on purpose. There's one thing I really want to talk about before I have to go. And that's how hard it is living on Medicaid. You know, it could take so long just to get the things that I need to survive. Like, for example, this wheelchair, it took me over a year to get. So I started thinking, you know, I need a group that knows how to get things done fast in this country. So that's why I decided to join the NRA. Because I realized that for my next wheelchair, all I have to do is say, I need a gun. And my chair will be here within 48 hours. No doctors, no insurance companies, no waiting. Just me, my new wheelchair, and my AR-15. Thank you, everybody.
Okay. Thank you, Steve. I really appreciate comedy, and the reason we use that here at My People's is because, frankly, some of these conversations can get very heavy. Because thinking about the history of this country is heavy, right? Thinking about the state of our democracy is heavy, and how our power has been, I won't say taken or stripped, right? But there's this idea that we don't have power or don't know how to use it. Those are heavy conversations. So it's critical that we move and shift into a direction of what do we do with that? Right? We talk about the critique, it's important to elevate that, but what do we do now? So Jose, I want to start with you from the standpoint of media, because that's what your kind of career is all about, is figuring out how to elevate these voices and these stories in the media for change.
Well, I mean, I just have to say that I hope everybody here realizes that you're not going to see a panel like this anywhere in this convention. You're just not. You're not going to see this kind of inclusion, this kind of even complexity in the way we talk about American history, because most of the media have bought into what the fuck they bought into already, right? I'm sorry that I just said that again, but, and it's really sad because, you know, journalism is my church, reporting is my religion. And it makes me really, really sick how the political media has failed us, absolutely failed us. This is the mainstream media that I was a part of when I was at the Washington Post 8 years ago, when we were covering Obama and Hillary and all of that. And, you know, the mostly white media was like, oh my God, post-racial America, right? And I'm like sitting there, I'm going like, I'm sorry, have you ever not had a black friend? Like, is this like, actually I think a lot of the white journalists who were like going gaga for Obama I started realizing, oh my God, it's like the black best friend they never had. And all of a sudden they're excited. Did you see Chris Matthews? Like, really sorry, Chris, but you know, I'm just keeping it real.
What did you say?
It's the reparation. Because this media, and I have to say this again.
Imagine you thought that was so funny, Rashad.
American newsrooms are less diverse now than when I started in journalism in 1998. There are less people of color working in American newsrooms now when the country is at the most diverse it's ever been. This is why, for example, the huge historic victory the Color of Change has had at the RNC, like that's not something that I saw it in the Washington Post, but it was something that every media outlet should have covered. Why? Because I don't want to name these civil rights organizations that take a lot of money from these corporations and all of that. I don't want to piss too many people off. Some of whom are giving me whatever. But we have to really, my favorite quote about journalism and media is from Arthur Miller, the playwright, who said that, a good newspaper, he said, is a country talking to itself. All the conversations, and I'm saying this as somebody who was just on MSNBC earlier today, and I'm doing Fox News and Megyn Kelly tonight. Like, I have to play that game just to make sure we're disrupting their conversation. But how do we build this new one?
Yep.
Like, and that's why if you haven't seen my people's online, check it out. Like, how do we build something like this so that this is the mainstream? That we're not some marginalized people.
Jump in, Rosa.
I feel like we shouldn't even be on those shows anymore. But that's an opinion.
I don't agree with that. But yeah, but
no,
go ahead.
That's fine.
Yeah,
That's the whole point. That we can have that
No,
discussion.
of course,
tell us your
You know, because I even think progressive media is still white. Right? Like,
Of course, yeah.
The only time you've heard about what's happening in Puerto Rico, which you were saying about citizenship, right? In 1917, we were forced on the island to become American citizens to fight for the war. Now you're hearing about Puerto Rico because it's in a financial crisis created by colonialism, right? And then the way to get out of that financial crisis is by President Obama and the Democratic Party pushing the Promesa bill. The Promesa bill drops the minimum wage to $4.25 on the island in September. 180 schools are closing. They've cut all water monitoring, right? Like, these issues are still not being brought up. So I'm always about how do we create our own spaces?
Absolutely.
How do we use art, activism, young people right there, like in front of us? How do we get to understand that because the media is playing that fourth estate role very well?
Okay, so how do we?
How do we do
I
that?
think not only supporting independent media, but right now I really think we all should be clapping loudly for The Intercept and what WikiLeaks has just done.
Yep.
Right? Like, they want to spin that whole story about it being Russia. No, it's not. Y'all wrote those emails. You didn't want somebody to get a certain nomination, So The Intercept has been doing that work. We need to just keep building on that, is my belief. And spaces like this, I think, build on that.
And it's two steps, right? It's two steps to ensure that we have a nation that serves us, which is, yes, we need a diverse media. We need a diverse political branches where we have our community represented. But the other step is holding accountable those people of color. Because just the fact that we have a Latino, just the fact that we have an African American in the White House doesn't mean they're like, oh, great, our job is done. Because the reality is, under President Obama, the first black president, we, put it this way, we have the whole rhetoric about Donald Trump and the deportation force and the wall. But you know what? Donald Trump has deported 0. From 1893 to 1997, the U.S. deported almost 2.1 million people. President Obama did that in 6 years. The first black president. So it comes to a point where, yes, President Obama has done great things, absolutely. But you know what, at the end, when I go to Washington, D.C., when I go to the DNC, I'm not there to make friends with politicians.
Has he really, like Black Lives Matter rises under President Obama, the most deportations, drone wars, the expansion of mass incarceration, more decline in the social state. Like, I really think we have to be real. The thing is, was it a historical moment? Of course, but also as organizers and activists, like you just pointed out and we're pointing out here, the black man can be the face for imperialism and the white woman can be the face for patriarchy. And that's what we've been getting.
Unless we push,
I know people don't like what I have to say, might disagree, not you. I heard the little bit of, not you. But that's all right.
And this is why,
That's all good.
and this goes back to presence versus power, but it also goes back to what do we structurally change? Because what we oftentimes do as progressives is we have these conversations and we change things at the symbolic level. We paint over sort of the same structures with a different color or with a different message or with a different sort of poll-tested idea of what we're going to do, and we don't actually deal with the structural changes. Unless we sort of battle back and undo the grip that corporate power has over our democracy and our economy, we actually won't have any type of changes. And whoever gets in office will only serve the systems that got them there. So we can have a congressional black caucus that could be just as problematic on a whole host of issues because they are serving interests that got them into power, and undoing those systems would actually change the dynamics in which they got into office. And we see that across so many of the different political spectrums. And so I completely recognize that when Color of Change runs a campaign around getting corporations to back out of the RNC convention, that's a respond moment to a big thing. That is a building moment around building energy and educating people, but it's not a systemic pivot. It doesn't systemic or structurally change the way in which corporations long-term engage. In fact, we still won't know who sponsored either one of these conventions, Democrats or Republicans, till 60 days after the convention. All the corporate money that goes to these conventions, we won't know about till 60 days after, because these conventions are not for us. These conventions are to serve sort of like political interests and corporate interests, and unless we do the long-term work, and that doesn't mean that we can suddenly go out on the street and first talk to people about undoing Citizens United. It means that we have to identify moments that are happening in the world and build the type of energy that gets people on board, and then we move people to the systemic change. That's good organizing. But we cannot mistake sort of the momentary campaigns that we have for the structural change that we actually need, both in our democracy and our economy, and the things that are actually going to make the rules different for all of us.
So Calina, I want to ask you this before we, the conversation is so good, but I want to ask you this before we kind of lead it to a close. Having heard all of that, knowing what you know, right, knowing everything that you know about power, about democracy, about systemic change, what are you saying to college students? Because as I was thinking and listening to us talking about the disappointment and the disillusionment that has happened since 2008 for a lot of folks who were first-time voters, I wonder, what do we say to them now? What do we say to first-time voters or people who are just being introduced to the system when it sounds like there is so much and it sounds like it's rigged, and why participate? What are you saying to them?
Well, I would say that justifiably, I am ashamed at the ways that I have not been taught collectively in this country how to then inherit this country. I can't believe we're even here right now, and I often feel like super hopeless. Like, man, this is insane. I'm looking to these leaders who are supposed to be about the quality of our lives as citizens, and instead they're demeaning the quality of our lives to get ahead of what? For what? I don't know that. And so there's a lot of young people who, one, come up in the education system, and we don't learn about politics in community schools the way that someone with 60 G's a year would learn in a private school, or things like that. So there's a lack of informing us from a young age. Like, I might not need to know algebra, but I should probably know what policy affects if I'm gonna have food or water today. Those things are not present. But I'm saying that as a young person, I can't really tell someone to go out and engage in this system when they see in their own way how it has constantly failed. But what I can say is that we are done. Like, we're done with recognizing these systems that have not worked. Violence does not work. What are the things that are not sustainable that we just ultimately have to be like, okay, we can pick and choose. We can look at history and say, that probably wasn't effective. We probably shouldn't do that again, or certain things like that. But for me, it's this awakening of the fight that your generation has been having, and the fight that our grandparents have had, and And we're still healing from that. We're still healing
that
from.
old.
Well, I mean, I'm just. I look up to you. I look.
I know. I'm teasing. No, you're right.
And as my generation, we're trying to figure out why it's been so difficult for the past generation, and why it's been, and then the difficulties for the past generation. And so, I feel like we have to acknowledge the root of the issues before we can restructure these things. And the only way to do that is to be done. Like, we have to figure out, like. Yeah. And as a young person, there's so much I don't know. There's so much I don't know, and I'm still learning so much. But what I know is that we have recognized the trauma. We have recognized the ways that we have been broken, and we're trying to heal that on a human level. We're trying to figure out how that revolution happens on a human level and not necessarily on a systemic or political level, because systems and politics only work with humans. And so we have to come back to the humanity of it, right? The family that you're talking about, so I would say, on college campuses, those are still systems. Academia is a system. It is a Western colonial system. And I'm the only person of color, I'm the only Native person sitting in classrooms with folks who it's normal for them, And so how do you not even correct someone for what's normal to them, but to recognize and put empathy in place. So,
let me say, it's not only college students.
right.
My daughter's 11 years old. She was at her first rally at 6 months because the state kills Ayanna Jones at 7, and they kill Tamir Rice, and they do what they do to indigenous people. So I think it's the minute you come out the womb.
Yeah.
You have to racially socialize our people. Those are not our leaders that we see. Those are kings and queens trying to have some type of dynasty, and that we have to consistently be decolonizing our minds, whether we're 6 months old or 60 years old. And lastly, look, the struggle's beautiful. I think a lot of times as organizers and activists, we have to be very clear. Like, it is hard ass work, but it is a beautiful struggle. Our ancestors have been here before. It's the reason we exist now, and it's got to start with the babies.
And just
has to start with the babies.
I'm inspired by that. I'm inspired by each and every one of you for this beautiful struggle. I'm inspired by the people who are here. That's why My Peoples exists. It exists to be able to elevate these voices. This is what America looks like. This is who is doing the work. Okay? So I want to thank all of my amazing guests, all of our peoples here. I want to thank all of our peoples who are here in the audience, all of you who are there online. We continue this conversation on our Facebook page, on mypeoples.tv, on Twitter @mypeoplestv. Make sure to check us out.